He wasn't supposed to hear that voice. But once he did, nothing would ever be the same. Good evening, dear listeners. We are truly glad to have you here with us tonight, to listen to a story unlike any other, a story of pain, courage, and redemption. Before we begin, please tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Which corner of the world keeps you company tonight? We wish you a pleasant listening experience, and may this story stay with you long after it ends. Now, let us begin. He wasn't supposed to hear that voice. But once he did, nothing would ever be the same. The morning sun rose over the fields like it always did, slow and merciless. The air was heavy with dust and sweat, and the smell of iron mixed with the breath of the earth. Chains rattled in rhythm with the footsteps of men who were not free, yet moved with the precision of a clock that someone else wound. Among them was a boy, no more than 10. Thin, barefoot, his skin the color of burnt clay, his eyes deeper than the river that ran behind the hills. They called him Eli, though it was not his real name. His real name was taken from him the moment he was born, replaced with a number, a shout, a whistle. He never asked why. On the plantation, questions were heavier than chains. Eli worked beside his mother, cutting cane, carrying buckets, wiping sweat that never seemed to end. She never looked up and only whispered, "Keep your head low, son." Low and quiet, and he did. Until that morning, he was stacking wood behind the shed when he heard it, a voice. Not the overseers, not one of the men shouting commands. It was old, cracked like a whisper crawling through time. It said, "Boy, you listening?" He turned, startled. Behind the shed sat a man, gray-haired, half-blind, with wrists scarred from years of metal biting into skin. The old man smiled, not with joy, but with something Eli didn't yet understand, sorrow mixed with knowing. "Come closer," the man said. Eli hesitated. "Don't worry," the man added, his tone soft. "I won't steal your work." The boy stepped forward, the chains on his ankles clicking faintly. "You ever seen the world outside these fences?" the man asked. Eli shook his head. The old man pointed toward the horizon, where the sun burned the fields into gold and pain. "Out there," he said, "men walk free. They wake when they wish. They sleep when they wish. They speak their own names. And no one owns their shadow." Eli's hands trembled. He didn't know why, but something inside him moved, something small like a spark buried under years of ash. The man leaned closer. "I was free once," he whispered. "Long ago, before they caught me, before I forgot the sound of my own laughter." He paused, eyes half closed. "But you still got time." Eli swallowed hard. "How?" The man smiled faintly. "By remembering. By not letting them make you forget who you are. That's how it starts." Then the whip cracked somewhere in the distance, sharp, echoing through the fields. Eli flinched. The moment shattered. The old man leaned back against the wall and said no more. But that night, that voice stayed with Eli. It repeated in his dreams like thunder. It told him to look beyond the fences, to see something he had never seen. Hope. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The old man grew quieter, weaker. Eli worked harder, not because they told him to, but because he was saving strength for something else. Something he could not yet name. At night, when the moon crept over the cane fields, he would lie awake and whisper to himself. Tiny words, half prayers, half promises. He would trace lines in the dirt, trying to draw the world he had never seen. A river, a house, a sky without fences. Then one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Eli heard that voice again. "Barely more than a breath, boy." He ran to the shed. The old man was there, lying still, eyes open, fixed on something far away. Eli fell to his knees. The man's lips moved once more. "Don't let it die." Inside you. And then silence. Eli sat there for hours, the light fading, the chains cold against his skin. When they found him, they whipped him for being late, but he didn't cry. He didn't speak. He only whispered the same words over and over. "Don't let it die inside you." Years passed. The boy grew taller, his back stronger, his eyes sharper. He learned to hide his thoughts behind silence, to pretend obedience while his heart planned escape. He began to notice things others ignored, the pattern of the guard's steps, the way the fence posts leaned near the river, the hollow under the tool shed floor where rats disappeared. He began to listen, not to orders but to the wind. because sometimes when the night was still, the wind carried the sound of distant bells, and with them, a reminder that somewhere people lived without fear. One afternoon, the overseer ordered him to fetch water from the well beyond the eastern field, a place few were sent. The well was old, half covered with vines, and behind it, Eli saw something strange, a piece of metal, rusted and broken, lying near a fallen post. It was part of a chain, snapped clean. He touched it, a cold rough, and for a second he could almost hear that voice again. Out there, men walk free. He closed his hand around the broken link and hid it in his pocket. That night he buried it beneath his mat, his first secret. Not a weapon, not yet, but a symbol, a promise. The seasons turned. Storms came and went. Eli became a man. His mother grew old slower, her hands shaking as she worked. She smiled less, spoke less. But once, when the guards were far, she whispered, "I see it in you, Eli, the fire. Don't let them put it out." He nodded, though he knew that fire came with a price. One night lightning split the sky. Rain poured like judgment. The dogs barked, chains clanged, men shouted. Eli waited until the noise was at its loudest, and then he moved, bare feet on wet ground, heart like thunder. He crawled through the cane, through the mud, past the broken post near the well. He could feel the cut of wire on his skin, the sting of rain in his eyes. He didn't look back, someone shouted. A torch flared behind him. He ran, branches tore his arms, mud swallowed his steps. He fell, rose, fell again. The sound of the hounds drew closer, snarling, furious. He threw himself into the river, the cold biting through every breath. And for the first time in his life, and no chains followed, when he woke, the sky was pale, the world quiet. He was lying among reeds, miles from the plantation. His wrists were bleeding, his body bruised, but he smiled, a broken, trembling smile. He whispered, "I made it." Then he closed his eyes, just for a moment. In the distance, a church bell rang. And in that sound he heard it again, that voice, now calm, almost proud. "You're free, boy. Now keep running." He rose, weak but alive, and walked toward the sound. Each step felt lighter. The sun still burned, but now it warmed his skin instead of branding it. And though the road ahead was endless, he kept moving, because somewhere beyond that horizon, freedom waited, and he wasn't going to let it die inside him. The river carried him farther than he ever thought it could. For hours, Eli drifted between waking and sleep, between life and the edge of something that still felt like death. When the water finally let him go, it left him on a muddy shore, alone, shivering, half alive. He lay there for a long time, listening to the rain. It sounded different now, softer, freer. No one shouted, no chains, just the slow rhythm of the storm passing over him. He pressed his hand against the earth and felt it breathe beneath his palm. For the first time, the ground didn't belong to anyone. It was just soil, and him. He whispered to the wind, "I'm free." But his voice was hoarse, like it had forgotten how to believe itself. When dawn came, the sun rose behind a fog so thick it turned the trees into ghosts. He stood weak and trembling, his clothes torn, his stomach hollow. Every bone in his body hurt, but he smiled anyway, a small, quiet smile that only the dead could understand. He began to walk. No direction, no plan, only forward. Each step was a promise. I will live. I will remember. I will never go back. He walked for days, through swamps and thorns, through hunger and fever. He drank from puddles, slept in hollows, spoke to the stars when the loneliness became too heavy. Once he found berries, bitter but enough to keep him alive. Another night he caught a rabbit in a trap made from vines. He thanked it before he killed it. He talked to the old man sometimes, in his mind, asked him questions that never got answers, but still it made the silence less cruel. On the fifth night, Eli stumbled upon a dirt road. It wound between cypress trees, the moonlight glinting off puddles like broken glass. He hesitated before stepping onto it, afraid that roads led back to masters. Then from the distance came the sound of wheels creaking, slow, tired, human. He hid behind a log, heart pounding. A wagon appeared, pulled by a mule, guided by a man wrapped in a dark coat. The man was humming a hymn under his breath. Eli knew the tune. He'd heard it once in the quarters. He watched as the wagon passed, then whispered the words the old man had once taught him. "Out there, Men walk free, he stepped from the shadows. Sir! The man froze, then turned. The lantern light caught Eli's face, bruised, cut, desperate. For a long moment they stared at each other in silence. Then the man spoke, voice trembling. You one of them that ran? Eli said nothing, just nodded. The man looked behind him, then lowered the lantern. Get in, quick, Eli blinked. Why? Because they don't ask questions when they hunt. They just shoot. Eli hesitated, then climbed into the back. The road bumped beneath the wagon wheels, the air thick with the smell of rain and old wood. The man said nothing for a while, only guided the mule through the dark. Finally he spoke. Name's Jonah, Eli swallowed. Eli, Jonah nodded slowly. Where you heading, Eli? I don't know, the boy said. I just keep walking. Jonah smiled faintly. That's how all free men start. He handed Eli a piece of bread. Eli stared at it like it was gold. He hadn't tasted real bread in years. He ate slowly, almost reverently. Jonah watched him, then said quietly, There's folks up north who help runaways. Safe houses, places to hide. You make it that far, you might never have to run again. Eli looked up. How far? Jonah sighed. Farther than most make it. And you'll have to cross fire to get there. They rode through the night until the sky began to lighten. At the edge of a small town, Jonah stopped the wagon. This is as far as I can go, he said. They watch strangers here. He reached into his coat and handed Eli a small pouch. Cornbread, dried meat, and a map. Follow the river north. When you reach the mountains, find a man named Caleb. Tell him Jonah sent you. Eli took the pouch, his hands shaking. He wanted to say thank you, but the words caught in his throat. Jonah nodded. Go, boy, before someone sees. Eli jumped down, his bare feet hitting the dirt. He turned once more. Jonah raised his hand in silence, then disappeared down the road. For 3 days, Eli followed the river. The nights grew colder. His body ached, but the thought of being hunted ached more. He crossed fields at dusk, slept under fallen trees, drank from the river when he could. He spoke to no one, not even to himself. Each sound in the forest felt like a question he didn't want to answer. One evening he found a small abandoned cabin, broken windows, roof half collapsed, but enough to keep out the wind. Inside he found a blanket, a cracked cup, and a piece of mirror lying in the dirt. He picked it up and for the first time saw his face clearly. He barely recognized himself. The boy from the plantation was gone. In his place stood someone older, someone who had seen the edge of death and stepped back. He stared into his reflection for a long moment, then whispered, I will not waste it. Days passed. The forest grew denser, the path harder. Once he heard dogs in the distance and froze for nearly an hour. Another time he saw smoke from a nearby camp and hid until it faded. The world was wide, but it was not safe. He began to think that freedom was not a place. It was a direction, a hunger that refused to die. And that hunger kept him moving. Then came the night of fire. He had followed the river to a stretch of land where the trees grew thin and the air smelled of smoke. At first he thought it was a campfire, but as he crept closer, he saw flames dancing across a barn, voices shouting, men on horseback, and chained to a post, 2 children crying. His heart stopped. He crouched behind a fallen log, his breath trembling. He could leave. He should leave. But the memory of his mother's eyes, the old man's last words, all came back in one burning wave. Don't let it die inside you. He moved. The fire cracked and roared. The riders were distracted, trying to save the barn. Eli crawled through the smoke, the heat biting his skin. He reached the children, 1 boy, 1 girl. Their wrists were bound with rope. Don't scream, he whispered. They stared at him, terrified, confused, but silent. He pulled a shard of metal from the ground and cut the rope. The barn roof collapsed behind them, sparks raining down like hellfire. Run, he shouted. They ran into the darkness. He followed. Gunfire split the air. Bullets tore through the trees. The girl fell, crying out. But the boy lifted her, and Eli grabbed them both, dragging them into the riverbank brush. They hid there, pressed into the mud, hearts pounding. The riders searched for a while, torches flickering, then finally turned back. When the sounds faded, Eli whispered, You're safe now. The girl sobbed quietly. The boy looked at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Who are you? He asked. Eli smiled faintly. No one. By dawn, they were miles away. He led them north, teaching them how to move silently, how to follow the river without leaving tracks. They traveled for days, hungry, scared, but alive. He gave them the last of Jonah's bread, the last of his strength. When the girl grew too weak to walk, he carried her on his back. At night, by the faint glow of the stars, he told them stories, not of chains, but of things he had never seen. Fields of flowers that no one owned, houses where no one shouted, a world where children slept without fear. The boy asked, "Is it real?" Eli smiled. "It will be." One morning they reached a fork in the river, two paths winding like silver threads through the fog. Eli took out Jonah's map, traced the lines with his finger, and chose the path that led toward the hills. They walked until the sun sank behind the trees. And there in the fading light they saw it, a small wooden cross, carved with a single word: Caleb. Eli fell to his knees. From the shadows, a man stepped forward, tall, quiet, with eyes that had seen too much. "You must be the boy Jonah sent," he said softly. Eli nodded, unable to speak. Caleb smiled and offered his hand. "Then welcome. You've come through fire to find us." That night Eli slept in a real bed for the first time in his life. He dreamed of the old man, of his mother, of chains melting under the sun. When he woke, dawn was just breaking, and for the first time, the world felt still. He whispered to himself, "I made it through the fire," and somewhere, deep inside, a voice answered, calm, proud, "Eternal, you did." Years had passed, so many that the scars on his wrists had faded into pale memories. Eli no longer looked like the boy who ran through the rain. He was taller now, his shoulders broad, his face carved by time and labor. The world called him a free man, though sometimes when he looked in the mirror he still saw a runaway. He lived in a small town near the river, the same river that once carried him away from death. Every morning he woke before dawn, built fires, repaired tools, mended fences. He worked for wages now, a few coins a day, sometimes bread, sometimes nothing but the promise of more. It was enough. Because freedom, even hungry and cold, was still freedom, but the ghosts followed him. At night, when the wind rose from the fields, he heard the sound of chains again, faint, distant, like echoes of another life. And sometimes he heard voices, a whisper in the dark saying, "Don't let it die inside you." Eli kept to himself. He spoke little. He smiled rarely. The townsfolk thought him strange, quiet, watchful, a man with secrets. But he was patient, polite, and honest. And slowly people began to trust him. He found work at a blacksmith shop. The forge reminded him of the sun, bright, merciless, alive. He learned to shape metal, to turn fire into form. Each strike of the hammer echoed in his bones like the rhythm of survival. The blacksmith, an old man named Tanner, watched him carefully one day and said, "You hit the iron like you hate it." Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe I do," Tanner nodded. "That's good. Hate gives it strength." Eli said nothing, but in his heart he knew that wasn't true. It wasn't hate that made him stronger. It was memory. Years went by. He saved what little he could, a coin here, a coin there. He hid them under a loose floorboard in his small room above the forge. At night he would take them out one by one, let them fall through his fingers and whisper, "One day." One evening, as he was closing the shop, a stranger came through the door. Tall, dressed in clean clothes, eyes sharp as glass. He looked around, then said quietly, "You Tanner's man?" Eli nodded. "Yes, sir." The stranger leaned against the counter. "Word is you were once from the south." "That true?" Eli froze. He didn't answer. The man smiled. "Don't worry. I ain't here to sell you back. I'm here because I buy freedom." Eli frowned. "Buy it?" The man nodded. "Name's Caleb told me to look for you. Said you were the one who came through fire." Eli felt the breath leave his chest. He hadn't heard that name in years. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. It was a list for names, ages, prices. Each name carried the weight of a life. "People still in chains," the man said softly. "Children, women, men. We have a network and we gather money, bribe guards, forge documents. We buy them out one by one." He slid the paper across the counter. "How you could help?" Eli stared at it, and the ink smudged, the numbers cruel. He whispered, "How much?" The man smiled. "How much can you spare?" That night Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the window, the moonlight crawling across his hands. He thought of the boy he once was, hungry, barefoot, afraid. He thought of the children crying by the burning barn. He thought of the old man's voice. Don't let it die inside you. By dawn, he had made his decision. He sold everything he owned, tools, furniture, clothes, everything except the small chain link he still carried from the plantation. He handed the money to Caleb's man. Who does it by? He asked. The man smiled. A girl, 10 years old. They call her Rosa. Eli nodded. When? Tomorrow. The next night he waited by the docks. The air was thick with fog, the water dark and quiet. A wagon approached. 2 men jumped down, one carrying a small bundle. When they unwrapped it, Eli saw her. A little girl with frightened eyes, clutching a ragged doll. Caleb's man whispered, She's free now. Eli stepped forward, took her hand gently, and said the only words he could find. You're safe. The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him, as if trying to understand what safe meant. He took her to a small house at the edge of town, a place he had rented secretly weeks before. He lit a candle, gave her food, and sat by the door until she fell asleep. When she finally did, he whispered, Welcome home. From that night on, Eli's life changed again. He worked by day, freed by night. He became a ghost in the city, quiet, invisible, moving through the cracks of a world built on power and silence. Each month, he bought another life. A boy, a mother and her son, a man too old to run. Sometimes the money came from his work. Sometimes it came from nowhere. Miracles, donations, strangers who left coins at his door. And each time when he freed someone, he would give them the same words. You're safe now. No one owns your shadow. But the more he gave, the less he slept. The nights filled with whispers, not of chains, but of gratitude, of fear, of ghosts that refused to rest. He began to see faces in his dreams, the ones he couldn't save, the ones still waiting. Their eyes followed him even in daylight. Sometimes he thought he saw the old man among them, smiling, nodding, silent. It brought him peace and pain. One evening, Rosa, now a young woman, came to him with tears in her eyes. They say you never stop working, never rest. Why do you do this? Eli smiled faintly. Because someone once told me not to forget who I am. She shook her head. But you could have a family. A home. I have one, he said softly. Every person who walks free because I did. The years rolled on. Eli's hair turned silver. His hands, once strong, grew slower. But his eyes never lost that fire. The people began to call him the man who bought souls, though he always hated the name. He wasn't buying souls. He was returning them. One winter night, a messenger came to his door, wet, shivering, clutching a letter. Eli opened it slowly. The handwriting was rough but familiar. Brother, they found the network. We're scattered. Caleb's gone, but they don't know your name. Keep it that way. You did more than any of us. If they come, burn this letter. Jonah's son Eli folded the letter and stared at the fire for a long time. Then he burned it, one corner at a time, until only ashes remained. He whispered to the flames, I'll keep going. The next morning, he packed a small bag and left town. He moved north again, new name, new forge, new ghosts. No one knew who he was. No one asked. He built another workshop, another home for the lost. By now, Rosa had children of her own. She sent him letters sometimes, signed, Your daughter by freedom. Each word was worth more than gold. But even as peace crept into his days, the past never fully let go. At night, when the wind carried the sound of the river, he would sit by the window and open a small wooden box. Inside were coins, not of money, but of memory. Each coin engraved with a name, Rosa, Daniel, Moses, Clara, dozens of them. Lives he had touched, lives he had brought back from darkness. He would touch each one gently, whispering, You are free. Then he would close the box and stare at the stars. And sometimes, just for a moment, he thought he saw faces among them, smiling, glowing, endless. One night, as snow fell outside, a knock came at his door. He opened it to find a boy, thin, barefoot, shivering. Sir, the boy said, they told me you could help. Eli nodded slowly. Come in, son. You're safe here. The boy stepped inside. Eli closed the door, lit the fire, and smiled. The boy looked around the small room, the forge tools, the maps, the box on the table. What is this place? He asked. Eli answered quietly. "A house without chains." That night, as the boy slept, Eli sat by the fire, listening to the crackle of wood. He felt the warmth on his skin, the same warmth he once feared as the fire of punishment. Now it was the fire of life. He whispered to the shadows, "I bought their freedom." One coin at a time, and in the silence that followed, the ghosts were quiet, not gone but at peace. They had followed him all these years, but now they stood behind him, not before him, watching, guarding, grateful. He closed his eyes, leaned back, and let the fire burn. The years passed like quiet footsteps on an old wooden floor. The seasons no longer surprised him. He had seen too many summers burn and too many winters die. Eli was old now. His hair had turned the color of frost, his hands marked by time and labor, but his eyes still held that same flame, small, steady, unyielding. He lived in a house that he built with his own hands. Not large, not rich, but warm, a house that smelled of iron, fire, and bread. And laughter. Yes, laughter, because now it was filled with it. Children ran through the halls, children he had once freed, children of those he had saved, children who would never know the taste of chains or the sound of the whip. They called him Mr. Eli. Some called him Papa, and when they asked him about the old days, he would smile, look at the fire and say, "Not today, little ones." The ghosts are sleeping. Every morning he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the river, the same river that once carried him from fear into freedom. He loved to listen, to the wind in the grass, the songs of birds, the laughter inside. Sometimes he whispered to himself, "This is what freedom sounds like." The forge still stood beside the house. He no longer worked there every day, but sometimes when the mood struck him, he would light the fire, hammer the metal, and remember. The sparks reminded him of stars. The heat reminded him of the road through fire. And every time the hammer struck, he thought, "This sound once meant pain. Now it means life." Rosa visited often. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her children tall, proud, full of laughter. She would sit beside him and say, "You still work too hard, Papa." He would chuckle, slow and deep. "I'm not working. I'm remembering." Sometimes she'd bring letters from people he had once freed. They came from all over, cities, farms, across rivers and borders. Letters filled with words like thank you, home, family, freedom. He never replied. He didn't need to. He kept them all in a small wooden box beside the coins of names. When he opened it, he could feel their voices in the paper. And sometimes, when the night was quiet enough, he swore he heard them singing. One evening, as the sun bled into gold, Eli sat by the fire with the children gathered around. He was quieter than usual. His hands rested on his knees. His breath slow, steady. "Mr. Eli," one of the little boys said, "is it true you once ran from bad men?" Eli smiled faintly. "Yes, I ran very far. Were you scared?" He nodded slowly. Every step, the children leaned closer. "What happened then?" Eli looked at the fire for a long time before he spoke. "I kept running, until the fear turned into something else." "What?" "Hope." They were silent for a moment. The fire crackled softly, painting the walls in orange light. "Did you win?" another asked. Eli smiled again. A small, gentle smile that carried both joy and sorrow. "No one wins, little one. We just keep walking until the road becomes light." That night, when the house had gone still, he sat by the window looking out at the stars. The river glimmered under the moon. The trees whispered softly in the wind. He felt the weight of years in his bones, but not in his heart. He whispered, "I kept my promise, old friend." Somewhere in that silence, he thought he heard the old man's voice, the same cracked whisper that started it all. "You did well, boy." "You didn't let it die," Eli smiled. "Not a chance." He rose slowly, his legs weak, and walked to the forge one last time. He opened the doors. The smell of ash and metal welcomed him like an old friend. He lit the fire, watched the flames rise, felt the warmth kiss his hands. From a small box he took out the broken chain link, the one he had kept since that first day of freedom. It was rusted now, dull, cold. He held it up to the light and whispered, "You've followed me long enough." He placed it in the fire. The metal hissed, glowed, melted, went slowly, beautifully. He watched until it was gone, until only the fire remained. Then he whispered, "You see, old man, I never broke the chains. I melted them." The night grew quiet. Snow began to fall, then soft, peaceful, endless. Eli returned to the porch, sat down and closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, her voice, her smile, the way she once whispered, "Keep your head low, son." He thought of Jonah, of Caleb, of the river, the barn, the children, the ghosts, all of them one by one, until the memories became light, and the light became warmth. When the sun rose the next morning, the children found him there, still, peaceful, smiling. The fire in the forge had gone out, but the air smelled of something new, not smoke and not ash, but iron turned to gold. Rosa fell to her knees, weeping softly, and whispered, "Rest, Papa. The house is safe now." They buried him by the river. No stone, no name, just a wooden post and a small carving of a broken chain. Every spring the grass grew tall there, and when the wind blew across the fields, the sound of the reeds whispered like distant voices, gentle, endless free. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would stop and ask, "Who lived in that house by the river?" And the people would smile and answer, "A man who bought freedom, not with gold, but with his heart." Sometimes, on quiet nights, the children, now grown, would swear they heard footsteps by the forge, and a voice deep and calm whispering, "Don't let it die inside you," and they never did, because his fire, his story, and his hope still burned, not in chains, not in iron, but in every heart that remembered his name. He never broke the chains. He melted them. The house by the river still stands. Its walls are worn, its wood faded by the years. But sometimes, when the wind passes through the windows, it sounds like laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from peace. Not joy, not victory, but peace. The forge is cold now, the anvil silent. Yet if you stand there long enough, you might hear the faint echo of metal meeting metal, like memory tapping on time itself. People say that on certain nights, when the moon is bright and the river glows, you can see him, an old man by the fire, sitting with his hands folded, eyes soft, smiling at something beyond this world. They say he waits for no one. He simply watches. And when the wind moves through the fields, you can almost hear him whisper, not as a ghost, not as a warning, but as a promise, "Keep the fire alive." And never bow your head again. Time moves on. Generations rise and fall. The world changes its face, but the heart of it, the quiet pulse of freedom, still beats in places like that little house, because freedom is not a gift. It is a seed. It must be carried, protected, and passed on, from one brave soul to another. And so, if you are listening to this story tonight, remember, in every chain, no matter how strong, can be melted by courage, by memory, by love. You may never hold gold in your hands, but you can hold hope, and that is worth far more. Thank you, dear listeners, for walking this road with us, through the pain, the fire, and the light. May your nights be peaceful, your hearts unbroken, and your paths free of chains. Until we meet again, good night, and may freedom find you wherever you are.